Ladies and gentlemen, um, this is by far our most adventurous guest of the Dad Spotlight. I am extremely excited. This man has about 30 years of professional outdoor experience. He's guided six expeditions excuse me, he's guided expeditions on six different continents. Like that's absolutely unbelievable. He's an expert in kayaking and canoeing, which I can't do either of them. So it is impressive to me that he can do both of those. I please give a very warm welcome to Rob Yates of We Get Outdoors.
All right.
Ooh, thanks for having me, guys.
No, thanks for being on. We really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
awesome to have you. I'm especially excited about this because I consider myself a nature lover. I'm nowhere near your level, but I would love to hear more about how I can get to that, even like close to that. So, yeah, man, it's awesome to have you.
Ah,
We gotta ask you. We gotta know.
We
We gotta know.
Get it out of the way, you know?
get it out of the way. So I can tell you the worst part of being a dad in the past 2 weeks is having a son who crapped on me 4 days ago. And it was that like changing of the diaper and you undo it, not quite knowing what to expect. And as the breeze like hit his bum, a stream of crap just shot out and splattered me. And that's like the past 2 weeks, the thing that jumps to my mind.
Oh
Yeah,
man.
I got lucky, I guess, because I always hear about those kind of stories. That never happened to me with either of my kids. I have a
Me
4-year-old and I have almost 2-year-old. That never happened, but I always hear about like those kind of horror stories. But yeah, I could definitely see that being the worst, the worst part. I mean,
Ah,
I got lucky as well.
yeah,
I got neither one, and I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I haven't gotten pee, no type of feces or
yeah.
fluids, nothing. I've gotten none of that.
do you guys have a training program? I need to come on it because both my kids have picked me up with that stuff. They've
Oh
been,
man, that's
wow.
luck. That's all bad luck. I don't know. I can't call it.
You too. You have a website or you have a YouTube channel and you have a podcast, right? We Get Outdoors.
Yep, you can
Yeah.
find it littered everywhere on the internet.
So just look for that. Look for We Get Outdoors. But I watched your video about, I know it's a year after, but about the quarantine thing, because that was like a big thing with me. Like my kid, our kids are about the same age. You have a 5-year-old. My son's about to be 5, but
Mm.
I did a lot of the stuff that you talked about in that video, camping in your backyard and stuff like that. And I love the part when you're talking about just talking to kids with enthusiasm about just simple things like, that's a great piece of firewood. Can you get another? Like, just they feed off of that. It's so true. Like, you could say about the most mundane thing just with enthusiasm, and it just gets them going, you know? I love that.
You know, before Christmas, I built a very large new garden fence down the one side of my property, um, and all out of timber. And my daughter came out and, well, what are you doing, Daddy? As I'm merrily swinging a pickaxe to dig holes and whatever else to put the posts in. And so I'm building a fence. I said, do you want to build a fence as well? She's like, can I? I'm like, of course you can.
Yeah.
So I got all the offcuts and I got a small little baby hacksaw and one of my little hammers and a whole pile of nails and said, here you go make a fence. And so within 2 yards of me swinging a pickaxe, there she is sat on the floor. She even stole my drill and started like my battery drill. And I started drilling holes through wood and at the end of the weekend, she had a big smile on her face and she was sunburnt and exhausted because we're in the Southern Hemisphere, so it's the middle of our summer. And
Yeah.
she goes to school on her preschool, or you'd call it kindergarten, on Monday morning. And the first thing they say is, well, what did you do at the weekend? Oh, I built a fence. And nobody believed her. But in her
She
mind,
literally
she
did.
made a fence.
Yeah.
And all you've got to do is just give them permission to do cool stuff and engage with you and a bit of a sales pitch about how great it is, how good they're doing, keep
Oh
them
yeah.
motivated.
Oh yeah.
um And so then the next question becomes, Daddy, when can we make a fence again? And I'm like,
Again.
high five me as a dad. The kid's
Yes.
asking to come and do stuff with me.
One thing I did want to mention to you, because you are in South Africa, correct?
At the moment, yep.
Okay, so out here, one of my son being 4, I always wanted to. I like the idea of like my son doing like Boy Scouts and things like that, because it's like just knowing where you are and having an understanding of a certain awareness, a certain confidence to be able to, you know what I mean, go out there and know you're going to make it because you have all these tools and these resources. But strangely enough, out here, it's like an anomaly. Like being in Boy Scouts is something that you get made fun of. And I'm curious to know, what is it like there? Is it the same thing? Is it like, oh, you're like, if you are someone who's an outdoorsman, you're odd to people. And it's like, why are we not promoting these people? I'm kind of curious to know culturally, what is it like, the Boy Scout thing, and as far as just being like an outdoorsman when it comes to like normalizing it.
Boy Scouting, generally speaking, globally is actually shrinking at the moment in
Yeah.
size. Or probably in line, like in a lot of the world, the Christian church is getting smaller and smaller at the same time, and they're probably shrinking at about the same time.
Right.
Probably for the same reasons. And I think that's a really. But let's not go down that rabbit hole.
You're not gonna go there.
We'll disappear, and it's deep and it's dark, and
we're not gonna go there.
I'll probably end up in
a whole
court
other
for
show
something.
right there.
That's a whole other show. That's amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, you make me blush. Moving on. But I think it's a shame because, you know, I was in the Boy Scouts when I was a kid, and I can honestly say it was some of the best years of my life.
I can imagine. It sounds amazing.
Is that how
really cool?
Is that how you fell in love with everything outdoors? Was it Boy Scouts, or was there something before that?
It's very. I think it was probably with my dad, but actually formally, you know, I remember one moment where I went on like an introduction to canoeing and kayaking course in a local swimming pool for little kids. And the instructor before a session did an Eskimo roll because he was off to go and kayak on this hard whitewater river at the weekend. And I still remember the name of the river. And I asked if he could teach me how to do that. And he said, you know, one day you might get good enough to be lucky enough to learn how to do this, but it's highly unlikely and it's very hard.
Oh,
and this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And it was a big ego thing at the time. And that's fine. Some people can be like that. That's how the world is. But I just remember at the back of my head having a bit of a screw you thought going on. And so I guess that screw you got me to pester my dad to take me kayaking. And because I wanted to learn to Eskimo roll and kayak that river just to prove that dude wrong.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the journey, the proving him wrong sort of got lost into the ether, and the love of being outside and pulling a tent out the back of your canoe or going down a whitewater rapid or or, you know, in the outdoors, it's a really weird place because our like real age doesn't really matter. Like if we're all learning to kayak together, it doesn't matter whether you're 50 or you're 5. If you've never kayaked together, you are now all first graders in kayaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up as a teenager with friends in inverted commas in their late 40s, early 50s, because we were still like the same level in terms of kayaking. And that's such a big eye-opening experience when most kids are like worrying about their friendships with other 13-year-olds. I had like friends who were 50. I had friends who were 8, and it didn't really matter because we're having a great time together. And I think that's the unique bit of the outdoors. I'm actually off to go and do some filming for it today. We've still got the last 2 episodes to finish. To finish being built. So Caitlin, my daughter, and I are off to go and film that. She that's part of my dadding, is to sell with enthusiasm. Let's do cool stuff in the yard, and off that's today. So I went through a weird experience at the back end of last year. When I became a dad, I decided that my dad was great, but when I really needed my dad, he wasn't always available, like physically and emotionally. He was just too busy, too much at work. But he did an amazing job of providing for the family, and like financially, monetarily. So I decided when my daughter was born that I wanted to be more available to her, but I didn't want to sacrifice on the cash. That was those were like my two non-negotiables. And I didn't want to sacrifice my relationship with my wife. That all had to happen at the same time. And so I started on this journey about how do dads hang out with their kids and do cool things? What can I do? And I Googled around, and there's so much nonsense online. I mean, you guys are putting some great stuff out there that's actually useful, but you know, there's like blog articles where somebody says, sit and be present, be mindful of your child's needs. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
You know,
what the hell is that?
Like being present. What does that really mean? Like,
I want to go do stuff. I want to go do stuff. I want to go do activities. Like, let's go do stuff.
Right.
But like, what is there I can practically do that's not going to cost me an arm and a leg? Because we all three of us know that if this having kids can be, you need to got your own personal gold mine on occasions to finance some of the activities out there people want you to spend money on. So like, what is it that I can do? How can I do it? And there wasn't really any huge amounts of real great advice out there. So I just started having a go at things, you know, the whole enthusiasm thing. I was like, well, when I coach kayaking to adults, they have a better day when I'm super enthusiastic. So let's try enthusiasm with my daughter. Oh, look, that's a check in a box, you know, that bit works. And then, so I've done that for 4.5-ish years. And then before Christmas, my business partner, Mark, one Monday morning said, what did you do at the weekend? And that was the fence building story. And I jokingly said, well, I gamified building a fence with Caitlin for the weekend. That's what I did. He's like, you what? And I told him the story. He's like, how did you do that? My 11-year-old, I can't drag him away from an Xbox. You know, if it doesn't ding and it isn't shiny and he's not exercising his thumbs, it's not interesting. And I was like, I don't know. I just assumed that what I was doing, every dad does. And so I, to be honest with you, and sorry, Mark, I completely ignored him until January. And because I was like, oh, it's his problem. He's unique. Get on with it. Sort it out. And then I had a client say to me from one of our other businesses, he said, what did you do at the weekend? I was like, Caitlin wanted to go hiking this weekend. So we went to the mountains and went hiking. And he's like, you mean you went for like a 2-mile walk in the park? I'm like, no, we did 11 kilometers on one day and 7 kilometers on the other. Wow. She's like, for a little kid, that's distance. And he's like, well, how did you do that? I'm like, well, I invented the idea of the candy fairy. So I had a packet of candy in my pocket, and sometimes I'd skip ahead or I'd like hide a little candy. She had to hunt for candy for the whole way.
That's cool.
That's a great idea. Oh yeah.
And you know, we had an ice cream at the end, and there's all this stuff. Do you know what I mean? And he's like, how did you learn to do that? Who taught you to do that? I'm like, I don't know. The candy fairy came out of an idea in the car on the way there in the morning. And suddenly, the more dads I spoke to, the more I realized that, like, as we said at the start, nobody's given us the manual, and I'm doing stuff that some dads battle to do. So what if I started to compile some of that stuff together and be able to share it with people? And that's how the Yard Adventure Pack came about, was me compiling some ideas and some activities that any dad, like a dad can be his own kid's scout leader.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because, you know, in the good scout leaders are often like revered and worshipped by the scouts. They're like, oh, I want to be like whatever they call their scout leader. I always used to call my scout leader Skipper, but whatever it is. But dads can be their own kids' scout leaders. They can be their own kids' superheroes. Talk about how I we could talk about how I drowned in the Himalayas. That would be something we could talk about.
Wow.
But we could, but I'm going to give you like the lead up. We could talk about how I fell off a cliff in Switzerland and broke all of the right side of my body. We could talk about that. And
wow.
And for insurance reasons, this happened now 10 or so years ago, 12 years ago. So for insurance reasons, I actually had to crawl out of the gorge with a broken most of the right-hand side of my body, because otherwise they were going to make me pay cash for the helicopter. And I knew how much that was. And I was like, screw that. I'm not paying that much cash. If I can suck up this pain, I'm going to get out of here.
Wow.
Yeah.
But the cream of the crop of all of this is the trip to Uganda on the White Nile I did in 1998. I was on my own. It seemed like a good idea. I'd looked on a map. There was a blue line, right, that went from Lake Victoria on the Nile going north. And I was like, well, there's a blue line. I've got a kayak. I've got 4 weeks. Let's go. Let's get a flight and go have a go and see what happens.
Yeah.
Why not? And, you know, I didn't think about lions or hippos or crocodiles or a civil war that was happening in Uganda at that point in time.
Wow. Oh my God. That's insane.
So the whole trip went remarkably well until I'd finished kayaking. So you'd think that hippos, crocodiles, lions, leopards, huge whitewater rapids that will drown you, you'd think that would be the scary thing, right? So I got off after kayaking for 18 days, and I had about 5 days to get back to Kampala, which is the capital city of Uganda, and then go to Entebbe and I didn't know how long this was going to take. So I'm like, 5 days, that's the timeline. And the road came and met the river, a tarmac road, which is quite rare in Uganda, or was then anyway. And I'm like, right, okay, this makes sense. This is the place. I'm going to find a way back to Kampala from here. And I get in what they call a taxi, but it's like a minivan that they put chickens and all sorts of stuff on the roof of, and they pack 14 or 15 or 25 people into the middle of, sitting on each other's laps.
Yeah,
so I found one of those going north in the right direction. So I was like, cool, right, that'll do. So we're driving along this road, and suddenly you hear sounds that is like, and I'm like, what? I recognize that. And then you hear it again, and then you hear it faster and more of it, and the taxi keeps driving. And suddenly you end up in a gunfight between the Lord's Resistance Army and their competition, who are having a fight across the road.
Wow.
And the taxi driver, luckily, the taxi driver puts his foot on the gas and floors it. Because, I mean, if he'd have braked and stopped there, we'd have been literally stopped in the middle of a firefight. And he keeps on going. We get to the end of all of this, and the world quietens down. And Roger, no offense, but it's the only time I've seen a black guy look white. I mean, he was like pale and drawn and shaking. And anyway, so we go out, and he looks around this taxi, and no joke, there is one piece of glass missing on one side and one piece of glass missing on the other side of the bit we're all sat in. There is on the bottom, on the metalwork, there is 5 bullet holes in different places where bullets have made contact with the taxi. There's 3 on one side and 2 on the other, which means we're definitely in the middle of a battle, right? Because they're shooting at each other.
Oh my!
Yeah. And so I always tell people it's not the adventure that'll kill you. It's not the animals. It's not the water. It's other bloody human beings. They're the people who are likely to kill you. They're the real problem out there.
That's awesome. We cannot leave this podcast without saying one last thing. We want everybody to make sure you share our content. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast. And what's the last thing, Steve?
Stay horrible.
Wait, Rob, we got to get a stay horrible out of you. Can we get one stay horrible out of you?
Hey guys, stay horrible.
Yes.
Love it. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and pay attention to all our social media. We'll make sure we post all of his fun stuff. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers.